all, and welcome to Meanwhile in the West, my weekly series where I look at what's making news here in Western Australia by reading letters to the editor in the local newspaper, the West Australian. First up this week, Shorten move divisive, 28th of January 2015. Whether or not one is a Republican, Bill Shorten's resurrection of the Republican debate on Australia Day was disappointing. It promotes confrontational division in the community and disrespects a celebration of the loyal, one nation spirit living in all Australians. Jeff Trudgian, Carlisle. So for those of you who are perhaps American or certainly not Australian, the Republican debate here is nothing to do with the American Republican Party, but rather a debate about whether Australia should become a republic. At the moment, we are a constitutional monarchy. The Queen of England is also the Queen of Australia, and technically is our head of state. In practice, this means very little, as it does with most other countries that are still part of the British Commonwealth, and there are many other countries around the world like that. And she has some power on paper. In reality, she never really does anything other than divest her power down to the Governor-General here, who pretty much is our de facto head of state. But there's always this debate about whether we should become a republic and ditch the Queen altogether and just have an Australian head of state, as most other republics around the world have already done. Now, in this debate has been sort of stirring for a while, and it often gets brought up. And the problem with this letter, saying that it's divisive and we shouldn't bring it up, certainly not on an occasion like Australia Day, which is about coming together, is that this is an argument for the status quo, based only on concern about people disagreeing. And this is a fairly common tactic used in many of these kind of issues. If it's an issue, if there's something that is wrong in society or something that should be changed for good reason, I have no problem with it being divisive. That's necessarily the way it's going to be. Some people are going to agree, some people are going to disagree. And that's just the nature of it. We should have these debates more often to bring the issues out. Hopefully we can come to common ground, but the fact that we happen to disagree doesn't mean that we shouldn't debate it. The idea of having an Australian head of state, to me, is a complete no-brainer as a principle. In principle, I can't see any good reason why we should still have Queen Elizabeth as our head of state. The only argument I've heard against it is just a conservative argument that change is bad or unnecessary in this case. And I think there is some merit to that basically she doesn't do anything, and so it would really only be a symbolic change, and maybe it's not worth the hassle. I think that's the only argument against it. There's a lot of other reasons why we should have our own head of state, not least of which is because she could do things legally. She could change her mind. Or when she goes, King Charles could also do, and he got some absolute craziness. And the idea that Australia Day should be a day for unity and harmony, I think, is rubbish as well. It should be about what it means to be Australian and what Australia represents and where we want to go as a country and where we've been as a country. And things like the Republican debate is pretty much whether we should be a republic or a constitutional monarchy, to me, is absolutely on topic for our national day about what it means to be Australian and to live in Australia. I think that's a perfect day for it. And yeah, it's divisive. And I think the only people who hate it being brought up are the monarchists, because I think on some level they recognise that they have no leg to stand on, and eventually when the older generation who are just sentimentally attached to Queen Elizabeth move on, or when Queen Elizabeth herself moves on, there's going to be overwhelming support to get rid of the monarch. Next up, Prince Phillip, 29th of January 2015. Shooting sitting ducks is so easy and so unjustified. Not anywhere in the flood of comments on Tony Abbott's award to Prince Phillip did I see mention of Prince Philip's very personal interest and support for conservation in WA. On every visit to this state, Prince Phillip would, in the company of the late Dominic Serventi, call in to the Pelican Point Reserve to enjoy the waterbirds. Then both would set off to the Albany area to view the recent developments in the rediscovery of the noisy scrub bird and other rare species found in the unburnt bushland areas. How sad that not just Tony Abbott, but also both critics and supporters of the recent award overlook a personal and real commitment of Prince Phillip to an issue that all Australians should be also committed to. The southwest of WA is a global biodiversity hotspot that deserves much greater recognition and support. Patricia Weaver Crawley. Okay, so I don't actually disagree on the point of conservation. I think that's fantastic, and we do need to do a lot of more conservation work than we are already doing. And yes, southwest WA is a biodiversity hotspot and all the rest of it. But more to the point is the issue around Prince Phillip. So, in case you haven't been closely following the news here in Australia, on Australia Day, the Prime Minister announces a list of awards basically recognising people for service to the Australian community and things like that. About a year or so ago, he announced that he would bring back the Order of Australia, that is the knighthoods and dames, that had been abolished under previous Labor governments as being a bit anachronistic and a bit too tied in with the monarchy. Anyway, so Tony Abbott brought them back about a year or so ago. And there was a whole kerfuffle over this, that this was going back in time, because they are tied very much to our British heritage and the monarchy, as they are. They have to be approved by the Queen and things like that. So Labor decided to get rid of them and sort of stick with a more, I guess, Australian Republican type awards of a lesser merit. Tony Abbott brought them back. There was a bit of kerfuffle over that. The idea, his response to that was that, don't worry, it's going to be for a way of recognising outstanding Australian citizens, and etc., etc. So then a year later, the second time that he's giving these out, without any consultation, he decides he's going to give a knightship, the highest honour you can in Australia, to Prince Phillip. So that is the Queen's husband, the British Queen's husband. It's just crazy monarchy-loving stuff. Nobody here, very few people here have any kind of attachment to him. He's known for being a racist who makes horrible gaffes in public, basically, and just some old crazy guy. And then there was these other letters coming in and going, oh, no, he's not that terrible, he's great, he does this conservation work. And there was a couple of others writing in about the other stuff that he's done in Australia. And the point that I have, which I think is missed in all this, is that Prince Philip's job is to be the consort to the Queen, and as a member of the royal family, his job is to do good works. That's essentially what he does. He's sort of a figurehead position, and he runs charitable organisations that do things like conservation, help the needy, and give money to worthy causes. That's pretty much what his role is, and that's what his job is. And he didn't choose that job or that role particularly. Now, he would have had some say, I suppose, into what particular needy causes he got involved with, but basically expected that all members of the royal family would do these kind of things. And he has not stood out as being particularly good at this. If anything, he's not stood out. He's stood out as being perhaps worse than some of the other members of the royal family. No, probably not as bad as Prince Andrew, but certainly not a sort of a leading light in fantasticness. He's done some good stuff, he's done some shockingly racist stuff, and he's basically behaved like a member of the royal family is expected to. And on the back of that, he probably deserves some praise for doing some good conservation work, but I hardly see how that elevates him to be deserving of the highest award that we can offer as a country, especially when the bulk of his focus has not even been on Australia. He's not an Australian citizen, he doesn't live here, he rarely visits. The idea that we should offer him an Australian award, the highest award we have in recognition of services, one is frankly silly because he's already got one of the highest positions in the Commonwealth as it is, as the Queen's consort, the Queen's husband. But secondly, it's not like he's done anything that outstanding beyond what plenty of other people have done. There are a lot of other charitable people who've worked for charities, who've organised charities, who've run charities, a lot better than he has, without the side, serving of racism and bigotry. But, that's Abbott for you. He seems to love the monarchy and has got no sense about politics. Next up. Penalty in the prices, 31st of January 2015. With all the recent rumblings about penalty rates, perhaps the other side should be looked at. Last weekend, I went out for lunch, and for the first time in a while, and possibly the last. A stubby of beer cost almost $10. That equates to $240 for a carton. Fish and chips cost $33. I can buy a piece of barramundi for about $4 and a few chips and a lettuce leaf would cost about 50 cents. Perhaps the people who are complaining about penalty rates could work on their pricing instead of screwing the maximum out of people. More people would go out for meals and businesses would get a bigger turnover. Tom Stephen Naranda. Okay, so $10 for a beer and $33 for barramundi is a fair bit, but it's certainly not unheard of here in Perth. Those are pretty much the going prices at nice places. And you're right, that the bulk of that is staff costs. So there are other costs in running a business, but here in WA, staff costs is definitely the biggest. And on the weekends and on public holidays, penalty rates is a big part of that. So we expect here that, people will be paid penalty rates for working unsociable hours. Usually that means weekends or late nights. And that means that, staff costs are very high. Now, what this means is that there is a collision course between the modern consumer ideal that you should be able to go out to eat whenever you want and buy more or less, whatever you want for a reasonable price. That is something that you can easily afford. And there's this modern consumerist type idea that should be available to all people on all budgets at all times. That is on collision course with the idea that actually some poor bugger has got to serve you and has got to be there scrubbing the dishes and cooking the food, and that very few people want to work weekends, and as a result, you have to pay a premium to get people to work on the weekends, especially on public holidays. Combined with what's happened here, that we've had huge wage increases across the economy. So what essentially happened is we had a massive mining boom, which was generally the construction of mines. So over the last 15 years, we've built a lot of mines here in Western Australia, and we've needed a lot of people to do that. So we needed a lot of people to go and do the building of all the infrastructure to run the mine, and then we needed all the support staff to go and support those people in that. So the chefs and the cleaners and all of those kind of stuff. What that meant is, and the boom was so big that we didn't have the labour to support that. And so there was a huge labour demand. So we had to import lots of people from the rest of Australia and overseas. But part of that is because we had a undersupply of labour and we had an over-demand for labour, that drove up the price for labour. So relatively unskilled positions became quite expensive to fill on mine sites. Now, you might think, well, okay, that's just a mine site and we're not talking about mining. What that did, though, is that flowed on through the rest of the economy. So people would go, well, why would I work behind a bar? Why would I work at a restaurant in Perth earning, whatever an hour when I can earn 2, 3 or 4 times that much simply clearing tables at a mine site in the northwest? As a result of that, people, other industries here in Perth had to then increase their prices to try and keep their staff. And then that flowed through to the rest of the economy. So we were all paying more for our goods and services because we had to cover the cost of the increase in wages. And so things like we were expending more, so we needed our wages to go up, so our wages went up. At the same time, all of these people were now flush with more cash, so they were buying houses and things like that. And so the house prices then went up, rents went up, cost of living went up. And so across the board, wages, etc., have gone up dramatically in the last 15 years, but so has the cost of living. And now we're stuck with a situation where, buying a beer costs $10, which sounds crazy, and it's more expensive than places like Sydney, which is kind of insane, but it's largely because of these massive wage increases as a result of the mining boom. Now, the mining boom has come off the boil to a large degree, because the construction phase is over. They basically built almost all the infrastructure they need, and now we're into the mining, the production phase. So now there's a lot less people needed to be employed on these mines, and so the economy isn't overheating like that. And I suspect there will be a correction over the next 10 to 15 years. And there are other issues around that. But basically, you can't simply expect... Well, you can. The only way that... Well, no, you can't. You can't simply expect for everybody to be able to afford to go out and eat on a Sunday and for an affordable price, because some bugger's got to work there, and somebody's got to do the thing, and those people won't be able to afford to go out to eat. So there's always going to be some class in society who is not going to be able to afford these things. Now, at the moment, what we're doing is we're expecting that middle class and above people should comfortably be able to afford these things, should be able to comfortably afford them. But at the same time, unfortunately, due to the economic circumstances, the people who traditionally be the working classes and the poor people are actually doing rather well for themselves. And so that has actually created a situation where this stuff is less affordable than perhaps it once was. Now, the only longer term solutions would be something like an American model, where you have a huge supply of labour, and hopefully sort of undocumented legal workers, and as a result of that, they're not caught by safety nets, and you can pay them next to nothing. I mean, the American economy survives on the idea that, working full-time at McDonald's isn't actually a living wage, and you'd need to have a second full-time job. That's the American sort of model for employment. And as a result of that, a lot of things are much more affordable to more people. So as long as you're not one of those dirt poor people, or not even dirt poor, as long as you're not one of those poor bastards who can't find a job to support yourself, then yeah, you can afford to have a gardener and a maid, because, Jose from across the border who hasn't got any documentation, you only have to pay him a pittance. Unfortunately, in Australia, we've decided to not do that and actually to pay everybody reasonable wages. But as a result of that, it means that we can't expect to have gardeners and maids, and to a lesser extent, we can't expect to just be able to go out to eat on public holidays and pay, a pittance for it. We actually have to pay a reasonable amount. Well, I guess that's the price of fairness. Climate Non-Disasters, 2nd of February 2015. Our beautiful planet is showing all who care to open their eyes that the United Nations, CSIRO, Britain's Met Office, and many politicians worldwide don't understand climate and refuse to see reality. 3 cheers for the planet. Sea levels are not rising as those authorities have predicted. Major storms are less frequent. Temperature rise at less than 1 degree Celsius in 150 years is too small for accurate prediction. The UN has a policy of restricting knowledge of all known sources of warming other than the greenhouse gas effect, which they clearly exaggerate. This is unscientific and leads to continuing predictions of imminent disaster which appear to be based on ideological reasoning rather than objective analysis of available facts. And the disasters fail time after time to eventuate. It's high time politicians faced reality. Robert Brooks, Geraldton. I'm not sure what it is that's brought out these global warming denier types in the latest theatre. We went for months without really any of them, and in the last couple of weeks we've had several. I suspect part of it's because we've finally come into summer and we've had some record-breaking temperatures already this year. And certainly I think the heat tends to bring out the idea of global warming, tends to make it a bit more topical. The end of the year also came, and with that came announcements that last year was one of the hottest on record, etc., etc. So we've had, I think, some recent announcements about global warming, and maybe that's what's brought out the crazies. I'm not sure. Maybe the West Australians just decided to print more of them this time around. And I can't be bothered debunking the whole letter. Suffice to say, it's wrong. It's completely off track. The overwhelming majority of climate scientists who are qualified agree that humans are causing global warming, that climate change is happening, that we're responsible for it. That is the overwhelming consensus. There are no other legitimate stances to take, basically. Although I'd like to point out that it has not been less than 1 degree of global average temperature rises in the last 150 years. I'm pretty sure it's more than that. Or at least, I'm certain that it is not too small for accurate prediction. The scientists are quite comfortable that in their predictions, they know exactly what's going on. Well, they don't know exactly what's going on, but they know it's warming. The evidence is clear and conclusive. I just want to point out, though, that it seems to me that, well, I don't quite understand these denialists. Because at this point, very few people are actually asking anybody to make any kind of personal sacrifice for this. So it's not like, I don't know, it's not like the young Earth creationists who cannot face the scientific reality of evolution because it impacts on their personal religious convictions. Unlike other parts in the world, most of the climate change denialists here, as far as I can tell, aren't doing it from a religious point of view. They just seem to be against the idea of it. Maybe it's that they bought into tinfoil hat territory, that the government is out to scam everybody. But even that, I mean, there's a sort of hints of that in these kind of letters, but there's not a lot of it. And I suspect that, I don't know, I really don't understand what's driving it. If the scientific community announced tomorrow that there was a large meteor heading towards the Earth that was going to, almost certainly wipe out human civilization, or at least fundamentally change it, and lots of people would die and suffer as a result of it. And 97% of astronomers agreed that was going to happen, and 3% dissented. Do you think these people would be... Would we still have the same number of people jumping on the 3% to say, see, it's not really this meteor, it's just a scam, they're trying to get you to... I don't know. I don't even know what they're what they're objecting to. Is it that they don't want to have to buy energy efficient light bulbs or something? I don't even understand. At this point, I really don't understand climate change denial. Not these people. I mean, I understand some climate change denial, but not these people who just seem to doubt it for no personal reason. Maybe I should write in and write in a letter to the newspaper and ask for them. Anyway, last up for this week. A leader for our times, 3rd of February 2015. After the stunning result of the Queensland election, Tony Abbott is a dead man walking. If the present government does not get rid of him, they will suffer the same fate. Surely the Libs must see sense and provide us with an alternative who understands what people want, which is a leader with a vision for Australia, not a team captain who cannot lead. Ken Miles, North Beach. So that's the other big news. Over the weekend, Queensland had a state election, and I don't know, the portrayal of it in the press I wasn't too impressed with. So the last election before that, the right-wing Liberal National Party they're actually one party, not a coalition like the rest of Australia, came in with a landslide. Out of the 89 seats in their parliament, I think they got something like 70-odd. Basically just came in a flood, one of the biggest election victories ever. The Queensland Labor government at the time was so on the nose that there was this massive swing to the Liberals. Now, that was the last election. This most recent one, just over the weekend, as far as we can tell, it swung back to basically 50-50. It looks like Labor's just going to be able to get in ahead of the Liberals. And so, by any reasonable standard, the Liberals have only just lost power. They only needed a few more seats to be in. But because it comes on the back of such a big landslide, people are seeing it as a massive swing away from the Liberals. Now, I think that's unfair, because I think a lot of the swing last time was really just a response to Labor. People didn't like Labor, and they ended up voting Liberals as a result. I don't see a lot of this as being complete fuming with, against the Liberal National Party. Otherwise, I can't see why they would have picked up almost half the seats, or almost gotten enough to be in power. It wasn't like it was a landslide in the other direction. It was still a very closely run election. That said, it's been portrayed in the media as a complete collapse for the Liberals in Queensland, and on the back of recent elections, I think in Victoria as well, where again there was a swing against the Liberals. This is seen as being a bit of a referendum on Tony Abbott's leadership. And the media, of course, and commentariat have picked up on this and are very much pushing the idea that Tony Abbott needs to go. That is, that they need to, the Liberal Party, because it's not actually a coalition, the Liberal Party at federal level need to get rid of him and get a new leader. I do not agree with the Liberals. Their policies generally, I think, are just rubbish. They are... So if you're not from Australia, the Liberal Party here is our socially conservative party. They are economic liberals and socially conservative. So they have the social policies of the Republicans with the economic policies of the more libertarians, I guess. They're much more like the Republicans, although not quite as crazy. So I don't agree with them at all. I'm much more of a left-wing Labor Greens voter. But I don't think there's any good politics in getting rid of Tony Abbott. It's been a huge weapon for the coalition to wield to beat Labor over the head with the fact that Labor got rid of two sitting prime ministers, essentially. It's been seen, this infighting in Labor was being successfully portrayed as really undermining their ability to govern, that they were all only interested in power, that they were unstable and untrustworthy. And I think the Liberals really, for any kind of political success, really need to make Tony Abbott work and not get rid of him. I don't know whether that's possible. And the reason I say this is that, as somebody who is against the Conservatives here, I would be glad to see the back of Tony Abbott. Absolutely. I'd be glad to see the back of that whole party. But what I'm worried about is that this is more a sign of where politics is and where politics is going in this country. That there is basically a sense that as soon as a leader becomes unpopular, as soon as the electorate loses faith in them, and it's not even the electorate, it's the electorate as represented by the media, loses faith in a particular leader or sees them as being, unsuccessful, that there's going to be this push to get rid of them, to install somebody new, and there'll be this complete focusing on the personalities and the people rather than the policies. As much as I would like to get rid of some of those the people on the right who are in power now, I can't see that there's any great alternatives. Malcolm Turnbull's about the only person who's got, I have some policy agreement with, but I can't see him actually getting any of those policies through, even if he were to become leader, because the rest of the party disagrees with him. And more to the point, that when Labour get back in power, or, hopefully, with perhaps some Green support or something like that, that if we're totally focused on personalities rather than policies, I see this as being bad for our democracy in general. And so I'd much rather see a sober focusing on the policies of the government at the moment, and criticism and opposition to the policies, and stuff who's in charge, so that we can get back onto the debate about what needs to happen. I mean, we've already talked about climate change in this video. Climate change to me is such a staggeringly important issue. And while we're focusing on, whether Tony Abbott can win the next election or not, or whether the electorate likes him or not, we are missing the opportunity to actually talk about what's actually important, which is things like passing a budget and, doing something about climate change. Anyway. That's it for me this week. I do feel much better after having ranted, although it is back to being hot. It's not just hot here, it is also humid. We've had thunderstorms the last couple of days. So it's hot and humid, which is possibly the worst way. We lose our internet connection every time there's any kind of lightning for some reason. Or maybe rain. Maybe it's that there's water in the wires, I don't know. So that's doubly annoying. But it's good to have a rant at least about all the crap that's been going on here. I hope you're all doing well, and I'll see you next week when we find out what's happening in the West. See ya.